Welcome to the show. Got a big show for you guys today. A lot of things to discuss, as per usual. Of course, welcome in. This is the Four Protocols Podcast, episode 186. Here on this June 16th, 2026. High top, a cloudy, yet still warm, Jacksonville, Florida. Again, got a lot of things to discuss. You got the Brendan Sorsby news. Stuff was dropping last night, so we'll touch on that. Got some thoughts, if you will, about potential upsets for the first 3 weeks of college football. Got a few games that I am paying attention to. Yours surely is. Then we'll wrap up the show with Houston team record projection. So we'll get into that here. Don't have, by the way, a graphic for that, so apologies for that. I guess I'll have to do something here on the socials a little bit later, so apologies for that. Didn't have time to add in the graphic for Houston, but anyway, actually, let me check real quick here, make sure bring up something on the docket here. Let's see, have this information here, have this information over here. Actually, before we I'll do that here in a little bit here. I guess we'll just kind of go just keep on going here. It's not that big of an issue, but anyway, yeah. So we have again the Sorsby latest on Brendan Sorsby upsets first 2 weeks of the season. And we had Houston team record projection. Best case, worst case, most reasonable scenario. Actually, what I think I might do, I may just try to splice up a graphic here for the Houston team record projection here when we get towards that. So if you're listening live or on the replay or on Spotify, apologies here. We were trying to get some. I thought I had everything done, but apparently we didn't. But this is my show. I control everything. So I think we can manage having to create some stuff on the fly here, but that's okay. Anyways, if you're new here, welcome to the show. Again, we do this show twice a week, on Tuesdays and on Thursdays. And tomorrow, I have it on good authority that we're going to try to get out a extra pod tomorrow. So we'll do one tomorrow. We'll answer some questions on non-college football related stuff, but also college football related stuff as well. So be sure to check that out on Spotify only. So that's a Spotify only, exclusive only. So we'll be doing that tomorrow. Should get that out tomorrow afternoon on the Spotify channel. Again, be sure to follow us on the socials, on X, Twitter, Instagram. Follow us on the podcast feed. And, of course, subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Be sure to do all those things. We should be good. Again, we do this show twice a week. And as a reminder, in the next few weeks or so, in about, 2 weeks now? Yeah, 2 weeks, we'll be on vacation for 4th of July week. For those of you in the U.S., that means a lot, obviously, because it's America's 250th. If you're an international viewer, then we'll just be off for a normal vacation. Not a big fan of taking those vacations, but look, if it's for July 4th, I'm okay with it. Then we're back to regular scheduled programming. So we'll be off. I think the plan is we'll be off. We'll have a half a week that week. We'll do a show probably on that Tuesday, and then we'll just take off the rest of the week. And then we'll be off the entirety of the week following after. And we'll be back the following week. So we're going to go dark for a little bit. Not ideal, but my plan is to hopefully have some shows filled in between that, if you will. Sort of having some filler shows in between. You're recording those here pretty soon, probably starting next week. So just as a reminder, the first week of July is going to be not ideal, but, is what it is. So hopefully everyone is doing pretty good wherever you are listening to this live or on the replay or on Spotify. So hopefully you guys are having a good day. All right, let's get into it here. Brendan Sorsby stuff. So this all started to break last night. Around 8:40ish, I believe, last night. Scrolling through the old Twitter X as you would, and I see this graphic pulled up. And actually, I can go ahead and just do that right now. On Restream it, I can show you guys what I was seeing last night, like I'm sure most of you were. Like I said, perusing around on social media, kind of seeing what's going on. And you notice there's a little old story about Brendan Sorsby, right? The whole Brendan Sorsby saga. We've been talking about that for the last few weeks or so. Or not few weeks, the last few months, really. But as I said, I was perusing Twitter, and then this pops up. This pulled up here for you guys to see it. If there's any way I can make this bigger, I don't think there is. Actually, yeah, I can. Here we go. So this is what I see. This is coming from Pete Nickos and on three. I'll just go ahead and read this to you if you're listening. If you're listening on Spotify, I'll just go ahead and read this out to you. So breaking: Brendan Sorsby and Texas Tech are mutually parting ways, per Pete Nickos through at on three. Sorsby will not play college ball in 2026. There's of course the link to that story on that tweet from on three. You can also see some responses there. You have our friend, not friend, but Will Compton down there. You have CAP Tracker and whoever Nick Perkins is. I think he's like an Alabama fan or something like that. But anyway, one of those funny things that happen sometimes when you're covering college football, that things can pop up at any time, right? And that was one of those situations where just something happened in the middle of the night. Well, not middle of the night, but late in the evening, if you will. Not even late in the evening. Oh, I guess it is kind of late. 8 o'clock's late for some people here on the East Coast. But anyway, so that happened yesterday. And he's not on the Texas Tech roster anymore. Brendan Sorsby is not. So he is done. They decided to part ways, as the reporting has said. Now, last week when we talked about this, when the initial ruling came in, now that actually happened a week before, because I was on vacation visiting North Carolina. So I was sort of behind on the news, on the whole newsroom of things, but it actually kind of worked out where it all kind of started to overlap with each other, all right? And of course, get the stuff last night and then the news the following week. That's one of those situations where you go, what the fuck is going on, right? So I told you guys yesterday, not yesterday, yeah, last week. I think the show this time last week, that you started to hear all this stuff, and it started happening last week, like around Monday and into a week from today on Tuesday, last Tuesday, that you started to hear all this stuff about once the ruling came in, that all these schools in the Big 12 were saying, we don't want to play Texas Tech. We will openly boycott playing them. Okay. And then you also have other schools like in the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC. Like I think Georgia was very, very vocal about it. Nebraska was very vocal about it. So you start to have all these schools either in the Big 12, not named Texas Tech. And then you have all the other conferences starting to get involved, basically saying we're not going to play Texas Tech in all sports, whether it's football, basketball, gymnastics, I don't know, like water polo or something like that, anything like that. They're just we're going to play them. So I told you guys last week in our show last Tuesday, I just didn't think that any of that stuff was real. I thought that was kabuki theater. I thought it was a pressure tactic to get Texas Tech and Brendan Sorsby to just say, okay, we tried to go the crawl route, we won, but the people don't like it, so we'll just kind of go away. And I also mentioned too, I mentioned a few things. The second thing I mentioned was that all these threats that were being aimed, that were being made up until yesterday, by the way, because we had the Big 12 was going to like start suing Texas Tech or something like that. So all these threats and all of this rhetoric, I just thought was all kabuki theater. It just was not real. It was empty promises. It wasn't going to happen. And I mentioned it last week. Like, it just didn't make any sense. Like, how would you like boycott Texas Tech while all these schools in the Big 12 have to play them? So what is Texas Tech going to become like? So are they going to have to become like an independent school? Like, were we going to have that situation happen? Were we going to have like the Big 12 schools who were playing Texas Tech just schedule other schools? Just the whole like. Just all this stuff did not make any sense. That's why I thought all this stuff was complete crap and bullshit. I just didn't think any of this stuff was real. I thought all this was, again, kabuki theater. I did not think that was all going to happen. And again, I told you guys last week, again, this doesn't sound like I'm trying to do the whole I told you so, but I kind of am. I also told you that eventually this was going to end with Brendan Sorsby just leaving the team in between last week or from last week all the way until fall camp. I just didn't see a path to where he would be back on the team because, again, all these threats that these schools are making were just so, pie in the sky, empty promises, right? Turns out yours truly was right. And if you want evidence, go check out last Tuesday's show for that, because I was very vocal about that. I even said that as much on X yesterday on my post last night. So that I thought was going to happen, and it did happen. So cool. I guess I'm some soothsayer now. I'm like Doctor Strange. I can see in the future. Not literally, but the other thing I mentioned too, and I think this is even more evidence of this, is that we are starting to see. And I'm going to mention this last week. So if you want to know more about what I was saying last week, obviously go on the Tuesday show. That's where I talked all about the whole Brendan Sorsby situation at that point last week, but I'll reiterate what I said on last Tuesday's show. That I feel like this whole situation, this whole Brendan Sorsby crisis, was going to lead into, or at least, well, not lead into, but reinforce the idea of the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 10 were going to be basically the four policemen of the sport, the whole realm of college sports. Okay, it's sort of like what you had after the political, or not political structure, but the world geopolitical structure after World War II with the four policemen of the world after WW2. That's what is exactly it's going to happen in college sports. With this whole like Congress bill going on and the whole thing going on through the Senate, I feel like this whole situation is yet again another reinforcement of this whole idea of the conferences themselves policing each other, not or policing each other and themselves, not in any other governing bodies. Again, this whole ruling via the courts basically confirms what we knew all along, that the NCAA is a four-letter organization. They have not been relevant since the 1980s. Yes, I know the Baylor scandal happened along with the Penn State scandal, off-the-field scandals, but those are more criminal situations, right? That was not related to just sports only. That was beyond sports. It transcended sports. And this situation, silly things like this and the whole Nico Iamaleava thing, not the thing that happened last year, but the whole recruiting thing when Tennessee was being investigated for that, and that ultimately got shut down. All these little silly things. The NCAA has no power. They have no leverage. They have no authority. And I think all of these recent court cases, and up until including this, kind of proves that the NCAA just has no power anymore. They're not relevant. They have been relevant since the 1980s with the whole SMU scandal. Okay, so I just do think that this whole situation will reinforce the idea, at least the other side of the whole Senate bill thing, of these major conferences saying, if there won't be any governing body, controlling us, we'll just control ourselves and be basically, again, the four policemen of the sport. So, again, I really thought this entire time that this was all a kabuki theater of the Big 12 and all these other schools saying, "Oh, we're going to boycott Texas Tech, bro. We're not doing that, bro. We're not going to play them." I just thought, again, going back to last week, that was all kabuki theater. That was all empty promises. Those were all just grandiose threats. That just seemed like those would never happen, and that to me that even made me more confident that we were going to get to a result that was going to ultimately see Brendan Sorsby have to mutually part ways in between this time last week up until fall camp, and now here we are. So to anyone who is denying all that, and anyone who thought, "Oh, that's not going to happen," that would never happen. Well, here we are. So again, didn't want to make this into a "I told you so," but it kind of is "I told you so." That I didn't see any of those threats being made up until yesterday morning of the Big 12 in this whole suing fiasco. But I just felt like those were all empty promises, and those were not that was all just it just didn't make any sense. And those were all just very much grandiose threats that made no sense from a logistical standpoint and from a common sense standpoint. Why? How would you do this so close to the season starting? Why would you advocate to not play a member institution of your conference? It just, to me, this was always going to be the result, and I think all this other rhetoric was all just a bunch of crap and BS. So, yeah, the Brendan Sorsby thing, the whole crisis, thankfully it's over now. I know there's also, and we'll move on, there's a lot of folks who are really shitting on Texas Tech. There's a lot of folks who are saying, "Man, they're a terrible school. They still deserve all the things that they were getting in between the ruling and today." I will sort of meet you halfway, and I will sort of agree with Josh Pate, but obviously Josh didn't go the route I went, which was more, I guess you could call it quasi conspiratorial, but I don't think it really is. I think it's kind of more. I kind of feel like my perception of the whole situation was true and it ended up being true. I just don't think people like Josh Pate, all these other personalities, can go the more conspiratorial route as I can, because they're tied to all these big companies and whatnot. ESPN, CBS, Fox Sports, and whatnot. So they can't go that route. They can only go so far, and they won't tell you that. They can always deny that. But look, I'm a fan of Josh Pate. I'm a fan of all of these other shows, but I do understand that there's certain rules and boundaries they just can't go. And unfortunately, our show isn't tied to all of that. But I do agree with Josh Pate that, I agree with him on two things. So number one, some of the hate Texas Tech is getting is warranted. Like, for example, that video they released like towards the end of last week, that weird, like, as Josh Pate called it, a hostage video. Yeah, sure, that just seems kind of weird. And yes, it's turned into a meme now. Uh, so that I will agree, they probably didn't need to release that. It just they could have easily just said nothing, right? As someone who has, majored in public relations, I would have just told anyone involved at Texas Tech, the athletic department, just say nothing, business as usual. We'll just handle this internally. You don't have to do this whole like podcast thing and like overly explain everything, because yeah, that's what normal people do, like overly explain things and like openly lie to you. Yeah. So I do agree, at least from that standpoint, from the public relations point of view, Texas Tech does deserve a lot of the crap they got from that standpoint. Now, I will also say that there's a certain extent to where, how will this impact Texas Tech going forward, right? And I do agree with Josh Pate with this, that I still think they're going to be a pretty good team. Now, am I going to necessarily pick them to win the Big 12 this year? I don't know. I mean, yes, they have Will Hammond as the starter now. I mean, just by default, unless someone else steals the job from him in fall camp. But assuming it's going to be Will Hammond going forward, and as long as Joe McGuire is still there, and as long as there are no, other like suspension or things like that. Because again, remember all this stuff that's happened, with Sorsby betting on not only college football games, but also apparently like Cincinnati Reds games, apparently. So all that stuff happened while Gill was at Cincinnati, and I also believe Indiana. That was when he was in Indiana. That was before Kirk Cincinnati. That was with Tom Allen as the coach. Okay, so that was just to tell you how long ago this has been going on, apparently. But to necessarily think that, okay, outside of any suspension from anyone on the coaching staff or anything like that, I think Texas Tech is going to be fine in terms of like, this is not going to be a total disaster. I don't think so. I don't think this is going to ultimately like derail their entire season. But going from Brendan Sorsby to Will Hammond is a downgrade. There's no like sugarcoating that. Okay, like there's a reason why they went after him, because he was the best quarterback available in the portal. Okay, like anyone telling you now, like doing this whole revisionist history crap, it's like, oh man, Brendan Sorsby, yeah, we didn't want him anyway. Like, okay, obviously you're a troll. You don't understand how this works. They wanted Brendan Sorsby for a reason, and this is a downgrade. Now, is this a downgrade from the rest of the roster? No. Is it a downgrade in quarterback? Yes, it is. Okay, like going from Brendan Sorsby to Will Hammond is a downgrade. But you're not downgrading the rest of the roster. The rest of the roster, you're not downgrading the coaching staff. Like no one, at least in my knowledge, is getting fired or getting suspended for an entire year. At least not yet. We'll see. But everything else there is perfectly fine, at least from the football standpoint. Now, again, yes, from the perception standpoint, from the public relations standpoint, yes, there is a black stain on the program. Now, that will eventually go away with time. We'll see how long that goes. But from a football standpoint, I think they're going to be okay. Now, again, will this, will they still be a Big 12? Like, could they still repeat as Big 12 champs? They could. Yes, it is the Big 12. It is still, as Josh Pate calls it, America's college football conference, right? So it's a very, very, it's still an open conference to a certain extent. I guess, is there other challengers in the room now? Yes, there is. Like, Houston, which we'll talk about them later. You still have them. You still have, even UCF. We'll talk about them in a little bit in the next segment. But there's still obviously Utah, even with the coaching staff change. There's also other schools like Texas, not Texas Tech, like TCU, for example. There's also, Kansas State. So it's not necessarily that Texas Tech has this thing on lock and key, but they're still like everything around them, at least from a football standpoint, besides Brendan Sorsby, is still there. Yes, you did downgrade in quarterback, but everything else on the roster, besides injuries, is still, everything's still there. Everything is still in place. So to say they're going to go like any worse than like maybe like the worst case scenario for Texas Tech, like going down the road of like 2022 Texas A&M, that route going 5-7, I don't see it. I would be pretty stunned by that, and that of course would attribute to internal issues and potentially locker room issues. But knowing from what I've heard about Joe McGuire, never met him personally, I don't see that happening here. I think these guys will find a way to get this past us. This will become a meme in about a year or so, and no one will, this will be a footnote in history. If you go on the Wikipedia page of this year's Texas Tech team, and I don't know, like the Wikipedia page for this upcoming season, I guess. But anyway, enough of Brendan Sorsby been talking about that for a whole long time here, almost 20 minutes. So yeah, I'm glad this whole crisis is done with, and I do agree with a post earlier from Brandon Marcello. Can we just get back to talking about ball? Like, can we do that? Can we stop talking about court rulings and public relations stuff like that? Even though, look, even as a public relations, someone who graduated with that degree, I don't know if we want to be talking about that in a college football show. I would much rather actually talk about things on the field and the upcoming season, not like anything not related to football for the most part. So glad we can put this behind us, and it's now going to live in college football meme territory now, I guess. So let me get some water real quick, and we'll move right along here for the next segment. All right. Again, as I mentioned earlier, be sure again to subscribe to the channel when we do these live shows. Again, we do these twice a week. We're doing it today. We'll do it Thursday. And again, be sure to follow us on the social platforms, and be sure to follow us on the podcast feed. Again, that's where we can only get the extra pod, which we'll be doing tomorrow if everything goes according to plan. I'm going to get this graphic ready for the next segment, and then we'll get right into it here. Just upload this, and then we'll move on. Again, if you're listening on the podcast feed, I just ignored the silence there. That's actually the wrong graphic. I didn't want that. So but yeah, if you're listening on the podcast feed, just ignore the lack of noise here. That's not on your side. It's not the audio cutting out. It's just uploading this graphic here on YouTube, which shows a nice visual concept or a component for the YouTube folks, but for the Spotify part of things, it's you guys won't see that part. But anyway, upset games. Now, I technically did steal this from the Cover 3 folks. Bet Elliott, Chip Patterson, all of them. They did this, I believe, last week. But I added in some different games on here. It's not totally the same, but look, great minds do think alike. Anyway, so I kind of taking an idea from them, but also expanding on what this kind of explain what this means here. But they did a segment on upset games in the first 3 weeks. Now I have a huge list here of all of the potential possibilities here. And I know there could be more on here, but I think this is a good enough list. Now, of course, as we get towards week 1, not necessarily week 0, there's only like one major game, if I recall correctly, or at least 2 major games. Anyway, once we get close to week 1, and the next any week, we'll eventually do our upset alert segment on Thursdays. We'll go through all of the games. We'll go through the categories and which ones have like the most potential for an upset, ones are watching, and ones that don't see, but other folks are saying there might be one. There might be ones, or at least other potential games you would consider. But anyway, these games I have listed on the screen here on YouTube on this graphic are all games I think that are happening again within the first few weeks, the first 3 weeks, 3 weeks, that could be upset games, and you could see a pretty significant upset happen here. Okay. So first up here, again, this is kind of in order, but not really in order. First up here, Pitt versus Miami of Ohio. Now, I know what you're going to be saying, man, that's kind of a random game here. Like Pitt's not supposed to be, a good team this year. You might be correct, but they have a good quarterback, and Mason Heischel, I believe that's his name. I actually got that right. Anyway, so Mason Heischel, good quarterback. Pitt last year, I believe they won 8 games, I believe. So they're not a bad team for ACC standards, but, the rest of the conference kind of sucks. Anyway, they're playing Miami. Not the Hurricanes, but Miami of Ohio, the MAC team, MACtion, right? But here's the thing. The reason why I have this game on here is that Pitt, now they're on here twice, and this is, again, the reason why, and I'll probably repeat myself here again in a few minutes. Pitt always has a tendency to do this early in the year. Like, go back to the year when Pitt made it to the ACC championship game with Kenny Pickett. They lost to, I believe, who was it, Bowling Green or Western Michigan or stuff like that. They lost to some MAC teams. This has happened before, and unfortunately, they're playing one of the better MAC teams, Miami of Ohio. And this could be a potential, and I believe this is week 1. So, early in the year, both teams have no losses yet. Everyone's hyped up. You always get those one upsets, either an actual upset or a near upset, right? Think back to a couple of years ago with NC State and East Carolina in that rivalry game. Yes, for those who don't know, that is a rivalry game, even though one of those schools is a G5 school. But, this can happen. And then certainly with Pitt, under Pat Narduzzi, they've had a history of either having close calls or just losing the games outright early in the year to teams that are considered lesser than themselves, okay? So that's why this game's on here. The second game on here, Stanford hosting Miami. This is week 1, by the way. Now, I think this is on Thursday. Let me actually go ahead and look this up. Because I believe this is on either Thursday or Friday. I think it might be on Friday. Let me double check here. This might be on a Friday. And I do know for sure this is a West Coast trip for Miami. They will be going on the road. Yes, it is on a Friday. Okay. So it's on a Friday. You're traveling to the West Coast. It's your first game of the year. You bring in all this, transfer portal class. You bring in a lot of, well, it's not a big transfer portal class, but you have a new quarterback in Daniel so you have his buddy, the receiver from Duke, both coming over there. And your first game is on the road in conference on the West Coast. Knowing my history and knowing, the whole fact that East Coast teams and, them traveling to the West Coast or vice versa doesn't technically always pan out very well. But here's the thing, though. This isn't going to be Stanford's first game. They have a game against Hawaii week 0, sort of like last year. I think this time it's at Stanford. So they would have already played a game. So they've already, actually, if you want to use a upset potential, it's actually the week week 0 game for Stanford, looking ahead to this Miami game. But anyway, this could definitely be on here. I would consider this a game to watch for sure. Again, it is the first game of the year for Miami, second game of the year for Stanford. It's them, Miami, going on the road, new transfer portal quarterback, a lot of newness with the team, with a lot of players moving on to the NFL. So this could happen. This could definitely happen. Not to mention a new coaching staff out there for with Stanford. I believe, who is it? It's an NFL guy. I think it's, who is it? Taiva, is it Tahiv Pritchard, I believe, or Pritchard? He was with the Washington Commanders for a couple of years. He's used to coach at Stanford too. I believe he's a Stanford alum. He played quarterback there for Jim Harbaugh, I believe. So, and also David Shaw as well. So, okay, so have a new coaching staff there. It's a opportunity to get a huge win from for Stanford. This could happen, certainly, and anything's certainly possible, especially when you're early on in the year when most teams are haven't played games yet, unlike Stanford, who has a week 0 game. Anyway, next up here, this one also could be definitely an upset to watch. LSU Clemson, big game of the year. Again, much like a lot of these games, this is a scenario where this will be a hyped up type game. This is a situation where both teams are going to be hyped up. A lot of, just a lot of newness with LSU. It's Lane Kiffin's first game at LSU at Tiger Stadium, being the head coach there after the whole hoopla going back to last November. And you also have the Clemson thing with Dabo Swinney. We literally just did them on the Team America projection segment last show. That Dabo, I guarantee you this, Clemson and Dabo would love, would just absolutely love, nothing more to spoil Lane Kiffin's first game. And to get revenge, too, because remember, they played each other last year. LSU beat Clemson in a very, very boring and low-scoring game. Clemson would love nothing to spoil LSU and to spoil Lane Kiffin's first game as head coach of LSU. So just knowing Dabo over the years, I guarantee you that is something that they are heavily thinking about. Next game on the list here, again, involving Pitt. They play UCF late in the year. Now, remember, a few years ago, this would have been a game against a G5 opponent, but not anymore, because remember, UCF is in the Big 12. And UCF, yes, I know they've had some changes with the roster and whatnot, but, Scott Frost's second year, they have, at least from what I have seen, a little bit based on looking at some of the rosters. Their receiver course should be pretty good for a Big 12 team. And again, it is again Pat Narduzzi early in the year. They have a tendency to lose to teams that they really have no business losing to, at least from a talent standpoint. This and the Miami of Ohio game are in that category of, hey, they could lose these games. So that's also a game to watch as well. Next one, I believe this is week 2 or week 3. Arizona State, speaking of the Big 12, they play at Texas A&M. Again, A&M, they just lost your offensive coordinator. He's at Kansas State, Colin Klein. Arizona State last year, how things went, I would assume that Kenny Dillingham and company would want to bounce back, and they would, again, want nothing more than to beat Texas A&M on the road at College Station. Now, the problem is, though, is that this is going to be a 9 a.m. local kickoff, because this is a noon kickoff there with the SEC and ABC. So that is a bit of an issue there with the body clock, but you can also apply that to Texas A&M too, and knowing also with A&M, again, they have a new offensive coordinator. Yeah, Marcel Reed, who I will say he got better last year. Am I still not fully sold on him? It's sort of. Yes, he has his limitations still. Yes, there are some problems with him as a look. If you're looking at it from the potential of him being a pro prospect, probably not going to happen. As a college quarterback, yeah, he's fairly efficient from that standpoint. But that one I'm also circling. And finally, Tulsa hosting Oklahoma State. This one out of all of these probably has the best potential to happen. Not only because Oklahoma State literally had to reinvent the entire roster, bringing in almost all of North Texas's players with Eric Morris, but because of that, Oklahoma State's at least quality of roster is a G5 roster. And who are they playing week 1? I think this is week 1 on the road, Tulsa. Not to mention too, it's a rivalry game. Again, sort of going back to the example of East Carolina and NC State. Exact same thing here. This is a rivalry game. And this rivalry also has a tendency to be very, very close. Go back to whether it was 2020, I think the year after that with Oklahoma State. And of course, last year with Mike Gundy, they ended up losing. This could definitely happen. And again, because of Oklahoma State's roster turnover, they literally have a G5 roster on their that's their team this year. It's a G5 roster, and they have to go play a G5 roster that is fairly good with Tulsa. So these games here, how many games here? But around 5 or 7 of these games here. Again, if you're listening on Spotify, obviously you can't see the graphic, but I'll just go through these again. Again, these all take place within the first 3 weeks. Okay. So yeah, Pitt versus Miami of Ohio, Stanford hosting Miami, the Hurricanes, LSU, Clemson, Pitt hosting UCF, Texas A&M hosting Arizona State, and then Tulsa hosting Oklahoma State. Those are games that I could totally see being upsets within the first 3 weeks. Those are definitely candidates for that. Now, of course, once you get towards the beginning of the season, once you get closer, we'll definitely go more into the actual more specifics of the games and the betting lines and whatnot. We'll get into that once you get closer to those to those actual games happening within that week or during the week of those games happening on Thursday shows when we get there. Okay. Moving right along here, I'm going to do one little thing here real quick. I'm going to create this graphic. Yeah, I've got to do this a little bit earlier. I thought I did, but I guess I did not. So what I'm going to do here is go ahead and create this. And again, if you're listening on Spotify, again, apologize for the awkward silence. Excuse me, but yeah, I totally forgot to do this, and I meant to do this a little bit earlier. So let me create this graphic for the team record projection series, and then we'll move right along. So again, if you hear anything, if you hear nothing, actually, nothing wrong with your audio. This is me just working on something here. So wish I had some background music or something playing, but I guess you can hear the fan going. Again, it is Florida here. It is hot, even though it's been, I think it's actually raining right now as I'm turning around here in the home studio. But anyway, I'm going to go through this real quick. Go through and make this, can I create this graphic real quick, and then we'll move on to the next segment. Okay. So again, if you hear me, me not talking here for a little bit, that'll be why. So Okay, well, that is cooking again. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. As I've mentioned before, we do this show again twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, around this time, maybe earlier. Again, given this is summertime here in Florida, we have afternoon storms. So, because of that potential, we may have to do the shows a little bit earlier than usual, but that's okay. I guess as we're waiting, man, it's been warm. It was warm this weekend, as per usual. But grant you, the heat we're dealing with this weekend was very, very hot. Not to mention the moisture content, being that we are in Florida, we are near the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America, whatever term you want to use to describe it nowadays. Um, yeah, it's very humid out. And, I went for my runs this weekend and even today, even though I went earlier today because of knowing it was going to be, getting pretty warm because it is summer. Still, you get back and it looks like you literally just got back from swimming. It really is that bad. And it kind of shows you just how much moisture is out in the atmosphere. And that's why we get these afternoon storms. Anyway, enough with meteorology time here. Josh, speaking of meteorology, a big severe weather event too tomorrow for a majority of the Midwest. Probably do a post on that later, give my thoughts on that. I think they even upgraded it too. Not to mention there's also some stuff in the tropics, but that's not affecting us here. So let me get this graphic pulled up here, and then we can move on to the next, our last segment for the day. Okay. Team record projection series continues on. We have done a lot of teams so far. I mean, we can go through the list here real quick. We've done Florida State, North Carolina, LSU, Penn State, Oklahoma, Michigan. We've done Texas. We've done Oregon, Clemson. I don't think we've done Ohio State yet. Maybe we will in the future here. I actually probably need to do that. Haven't done them yet, but we haven't done a Big 12 team, at least actually, I don't think at all. Yeah, period. Now, we've done former Big 12 teams. We haven't done, I think, a current one. That being today's team we're covering, which is going to be Houston Cougars. Of course, under head coach Willie Fritz, his was it now his third year, I believe, which is crazy. He's been there for 3 years already. Hold on, let me do this little mini research here, make sure I get the name correct. Okay, so Houston this year, as you guys have seen from the postseason, or the not postseason, the post-spring top 25. You guys know I've been very, very high on Houston. Okay, we've had them in the top 25. Other folks have also been pretty high on them as well in terms of how good they're going to be this year. And I just have a feeling, based on all the things I've been hearing of them with Willie Fritz building this team up, the schedule finally sort of breaking their way a little bit. There are some games here we'll talk about on the schedule. I don't have that graphic made, but I'm sure if you're a Houston Cougar fan, you know what the schedule is. But it's a very, very friendly schedule, I think. I think if you're a Houston fan, you're probably pretty excited, not only with the additions with recruiting and the transfer portal, especially not bringing in that the five-star QB, Keyshawn Henderson. Again, I know a lot of folks are going to say, well, hold on a minute here. You still have Connor Wegman, right? He's still around. Well, yeah, he is, but he's not going to be your starter. I think Willie Fritz has made it very, very clear he's not, unfortunately, going to be your starter. Nothing against Connor Wegman as a person, but at least the vibe I'm getting is Keyshawn Henderson. He is going to be your starter. Okay, nothing against Connor Wegman, but we've seen it enough. Whether it's at Texas A&M or at Houston, where it's just I don't think he's really that good. And there's other things folks have brought up too with his weight and whatnot. At least that's what Bud Elliott's brought up before. But like whatever. I don't think that's really that big of a deal. But anyway, so I'll bring up the graphic here of what I think is going to be the best case, worst case, and most reasonable scenario for Houston. Again, like I've been saying, I just think this team, again, based on their schedule overall, or at least their schedule alone, dictates them having a very, very high ceiling. And here we go. I'll move the graphic over here on YouTube so you guys can see a little bit better. But yeah, the best case scenario, 11-1. It's really because I just think they're just a really, really, really good team. And then, again, most of the teams on the schedule here are either And again, if I could show you the schedule, I would. But I'll just read it off to you. So they get Oregon State in the non-con. You should win that game. You play an FCS team. Then you go to Texas Tech, I believe, on a Friday. That's the Fox Friday game. Yes, we just talked about Texas Tech, and they're still a good team, but they did downgrade at quarterback. And this is early in the year for Houston, where they still are really healthy. So they could lose this game for sure. That is a losable game. Then to go like at Georgia Southern, I just realized that that's kind of odd. They go to Statesboro for that. I know I've never understood why teams do this when they travel to random G5 schools. Like Oklahoma did this last year going to Temple. I don't know what the appeal is of going to Statesboro, Georgia, other than just going to a beautiful college campus that I haven't been to before. I've been to Savannah, Georgia, which is like down the interstate away from Statesboro. I've never been there personally. Anyway, so yeah, they have a weird game at Georgia Southern. Then they get UCF. Luckily, that's at home. You go to Kansas State. As much as I do like Kansas State, I like Avery Johnson coming back. I do actually think they could be a decent team, but it is the first time head coach of Colin Klein. Then you get Oklahoma State. Same thing. Brand new roster, literally a G5 roster. You should win that game. At Utah, going to be tough, but it is later in the year. Injuries could pile up. 1-9. Also, we don't know where that team is, especially if they end up having a rough start to the year. Then you get some of the easier teams to play. You have Cincinnati. You have to go to Colorado and West Virginia late in the year in November. So there is that. I believe the Colorado game is on a Thursday or a Friday game on ESPN. And then you end the year with Baylor in the rivalry game. So based on all of that, I still believe that they could go 11-1 here. That is not out of the possibility. The most losable game on their schedule, probably Texas Tech, could be at Utah, or it could be at Utah, could be at Kansas State. So that is certainly in the cards. But the good thing is they don't have to play BYU along with the rest of their schedule. So that is good. They don't have to play them, and of course they can't play themselves. 9-3, not bad, but they get you the playoff. No. But even with a freshman 5-star quarterback, that's not bad either for Houston. I mean, that's pretty good, all things considered. I feel like the most reasonable scenario here is, at least in my opinion, 10-2. I don't know if them going 11-1 is like likely. It's not impossible, nor do I think it's likely. But it's definitely a best case scenario. Again, I would imagine if it's 10-2, I don't know, like Texas Tech could be a team that you could lose to. They could lose to UCF. They could lose at Kansas State. They could lose at Utah. They could lose at West Virginia. Colorado, probably not, depending on how bad that team is late in the year. But, I mean, that's not a bad draw, man. And not to mention, too, you're getting a lot of the first-year head coaches, and you're also getting the only team on here that I would feel really, really worried about, at least actually losing outright, would be Texas Tech. And they also are dealing with their own problems off the field. So you kind of did get a lucky draw here, and I having to play BYU on the road or at home, because that'll definitely be a tough game. Now, the one thing I want to mention here with Houston, similar in a way to Georgia Tech last year, you always get this with at least one or two teams during the year where they get into, especially when you head into November, especially like let's just paint this scenario here where Houston is, let's see how many games they have played here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so they would be 7-1 if they lost to Texas Tech. Sort of 7-1, ranked in the top 25. They're going into November, still have a chance to win the conference and potentially get to the playoff. Whenever you get teams like that, like again, the example I was using was Georgia Tech last year. These teams, like you get these, one or two teams a year when they get into, then they get off to a good start. They give through September, they give through October, but they have never experienced November with a very good record and a potential to have a really good end of the year, right? And they get into rarefied air. They start climbing up the if you want to use the example of the escalation ladder, you're going up the escalation ladder, right? You start out in September, October. It's a bit easier, right? Because a lot of these teams are still, it's the weeding out process of all the bad teams and all the teams that are going to be contenders. And then you get to November, when you're the hunter. You're no longer the hunter. You're the hunted. Again, we've seen this throughout history, right? Whether it's Georgia Tech last year, Mississippi State in 2014, an example of this. Again, these teams that are just not used to this stratosphere, teams that are just not used to being up to this level. Now, we've seen other teams like Ole Miss last year, even with all the distractions, They survived November somehow, some way, even with all the situation, the stuff with Lane Kiffin. Will he? Won't he leave? So yeah, story is a proof of concept there to overcome November. Now, again, it's very, very rare, and that's why that's an exception to the rule. Again, even Indiana, not last year, but the year before, in Kirk Cignetti's first year at Indiana, they lost to Ohio State in a pretty embarrassing and they just got destroyed. I don't know what I was trying to say there, but yeah, they lost in November. They were, even in this first year, they were at one point undefeated in the top 5, I believe, or something like that. So again, these teams, these programs have never been to this level before, or at least not in the wild. It's very, very hard. And like Josh Pate always says, November is a very, very long month. It may not seem like it, but it is a long month. You may as well just add in like 5 extra weeks to the month. Like, it is a grinding, not only for fans, but also especially for the coaching staffs, the players. It is just it's a long. Again, if you haven't experienced it before, it's a very, very cool air to be in. It's a very, very, hey, you're in the club finally, but it's very, very tenuous. And again, you go from being the hunter to the hunted. And every single year in college football, never fails to amaze me, at least 1 or 2 teams always get bit. Mississippi State had happened to them back in 2014. Indiana happened to them a couple of years ago in Kirk Cignetti's first year. It happened to Georgia Tech last year. And with Houston and Willie Fritz, you got to be careful to not get to that point where you get bit in November, because any of these teams, even Colorado, as bad as they may be, they could potentially get you on the road, especially on a Friday night. West Virginia, same thing. So yeah, so Houston, again, best case scenario, 11-1. Worst case scenario, 9-3. Most reasonable, 10-2. Again, I know. This seems like I am following the bandwagon here, but I really just don't know if a lot of folks are really taking Houston seriously. Again, I know a lot of folks still assume, it's going to be Connor Wegman, the starter. No, it's not. It's going to be Keyshawn Henderson. He will be the starter, even though you do have a returning starter, quote unquote. And this is sort of like, to me, and may not be the best comparison, but this is in a lot of ways fairly similar to what you had at Auburn in 2019 with Bo Nix coming in. Yes, they could have easily gone with Joey Gatewood and anyone else on the roster, but you didn't bring in Bo Nix to have him sit on the bench. You're bringing him in to be the starter, and same thing with Houston here. Keyshawn Henderson will be your starter. I can basically guarantee that. Okay, even though a lot of folks will still tell you, this should be Connor Wegman, man. Like, what are you talking about? I don't think so. Okay, so yeah, Houston, team record projection. If you can't tell, I am very high on them. I think they could be a very, very good team. They just got to navigate through November. Again, it's a cool club to be in, but it's very tenuous. There's a reason why the very few teams you get past November, and get to conference championship weekend still in the mix. It is not easy. And that's it for the show. That's it. How about that? Less than 50 minutes in. We'll be back on Thursday, and we'll do the extra pod tomorrow, as per usual. Or at least, well, not per usual. We usually do it on Fridays, but I won't be in the studio Friday. At least I won't. I'll be able to have access to my the equipment here. But yeah, we'll do one tomorrow, and we'll publish it tomorrow afternoon, and we'll do the show Thursday and whatnot. So yeah, so normal week this week for the most part, normal the following week, and then the next 2 weeks, or the first 2 weeks in July, is where we really can't do any shows. And I'm sorry, but it just is what it is. I'm not a fan of it, but is what it is. But by then, hey, we'll have the college football video game will be out. I'll give my review on it, give my thoughts on it, and whatnot. So, man, the summer really is moving fast. And then in July, I know it's not related to college football. Then we get Spider-Man Brand New Day coming out. And then we have July of Comic-Con. Of course, we'll probably do a segment on that on the big show. A very rare appearance here from a non-football related topic. But again, this show we do cover Marvel and Star Wars news when it's available. So we'll pop it into the program when we can. So until Thursday, again, we'll have the extra pod tomorrow, and we'll do the usual show on Thursday. Until Thursday, take care. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Enjoy your Wednesday. Until then,